Hi, I'm Dave from People and Risk. I help organisations tackle safety and risk through a focus on people and culture. I'd like you to imagine a scenario where I had an opportunity to talk to a bunch of your frontline workers and ask them, hey, was today safe, or was last week safe, or even is your organisation safe? How do you think they might answer? Now, in my experience, they do answer, and they answer from a place that's quite an intuitive or an implicit level. That is, they sort of tend to go, yeah, or sometimes no, but usually it's yes. If I say, how do you know today was safe? Nearly always there'll be a sort of a tendency to go, well, we made it home, or we've all got our fingers and toes. Now, what this highlights for me is that, first of all, people can judge or assess a sense of safety, but it's really hard to define. But if we push them to define it, it tends to be defined in really, traditional terms of home and harm. And that's because of the way we talk about it. My concern is neither of those responses work. The vibey answer is relevant and might be accurate, but you can't work with it within the organisation. And the getting home is really bad. Like, we've banged on forever in safety about the problem of using outcomes or lag indicators. But my main concern is that every day somebody gets home without an actual injury, or they get home, we're teaching them non-consciously that it was safe, even if it wasn't. We know that a lack of harm doesn't mean it was safe, and we also know that just because there was harm doesn't mean it was unsafe. Now, the problem is we've been trying to play with redefining safety, and I think it's too broken. So my suggestion is to leave it and instead talk about what we do, the focus, the input of it, right? And some of you have heard me talk about this before. Essentially, what I'm saying is we embrace risk. Now, it's not a radical concept, but stick with me, and I think I've got some ideas. What if I ask that same group of people, can you give me an example of something that contributes to safety, something that makes it more likely that you'll get home, even if that's their definition? And what I've found is there's a pattern of responses. The common ones tend to be, first of all, about themselves. So they tend to talk about awareness, training, and experience and knowledge. So there's a whole bunch of people factors that turns out are integral to managing risk and being safe. That shouldn't be radical. They also tend to talk about equipment. They might say PPE. They tend not to say things like guards, but things like tools and equipment, that sort of stuff. So there's a whole bunch of ones up here about equipment. That's an input as well. They might say rules and procedures, which does surprise some managers and safety people. My comment would be they don't say paperwork, but frontline risk managers understand that having rules and guidelines does actually help them manage risk. So I tend to sort of talk broadly about the idea of systems. And then another common one would be around information, instruction, and the sort of training one. So this is about communication, which really is about, are we on the same page? Now, there's a bit more variety from there, I've found, between organisations. So these are less tangible things, and they include stuff like planning. They might also include, just to be really radical with you, care, trust, culture, leadership, support. These are all really intangible things, but it turns out if you ask workers what helps keep you safe, they say this stuff as well. So my idea at its simplest is to avoid the problems of anchoring of safety and harm, and to make it more meaningful, we talk more about what we do than whether we did it. We talk more about the process than the outcome. And you actually ask your frontline workers and end up developing a model or an artifact that becomes the new anchor for safety. This is a much more meaningful way to talk about safety, although it is more complex. I accept that. But this is about culture maturity. So that's the other thing I want to say just before finishing up. Underpinning this idea are a bunch of other models and sort of thought processes and principles that are about supporting culture maturity change. So on one hand, it's as simple as ask people what contributes to safety and make that about safety. But I'm also going to say there's some other things that you need to get on board with, especially at a senior leadership level, that best support this to stop it just becoming another tool or another measurement process. Thanks for listening.